Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. On the show today, Rafe Kelly. So Rafe Kelly is back. He was on an early episode. He's a mate of mine, and we just like having long, deep conversations. And I thought, you know what? Let's record another one so other people can benefit from his ridiculous mind. He is the founder of Evolve, Move Play, coming from background in parkour, martial arts, all kinds of movement practices, really. I think of him as the intellectual of the movement world, or the mover of the intellectual dark web, he's sometimes been called. Introduced me to John Vervaeke and some very interesting other people. Hang out with him in the United States when he was on a course that I was doing. Rafe, always a pleasure, mate. Welcome.
Mark, it's so good to be on again. So good to have a chance to chat with you. It's been a little while.
Where are you in the world?
I'm in Seattle, here at home.
Seattle at home. Okay. And we always start with sort of potted history of people's movement life. Can you give us the brief version? Because people can always go back to the first one with you if they want more.
Yeah. So grew up at the end of a dirt road. Lots of opportunity to kind of be free and run around in the woods. Started martial arts when I was 6 years old. Had a mentor in my life who gave me a lot of opportunity to roughhouse. And then at 15, took up gymnastics and basketball and strength training. 23 parkour. Ended up becoming one of the first parkour teachers in the U.S., co-founded the first parkour gym on the West Coast. Got interested in méthode naturelle, which is an older French method of physical culture that incorporated a lot of things that are in parkour, but also a broader diversity of stuff, and focused on nature, and kind of got deep into that back in 2006. And then ended up, putting all these things together, plus an interest in play research and ethnography, and, a huge smorgasbord of stuff to create what became Evolve, Move, Play.
Now, I don't think we've had you on for well over a year. Is that right? Like, how long ago was it we had you on the podcast?
Something like that. Yeah, it's been a while.
Let's just have a quick catch up. What have you been up to?
Yeah, lots of stuff been going on. So we basically, I'd been on the road mostly teaching 2-day seminars for 5 years or so. And then my wife had our third child, and it became clear that, it was too hard for her to deal with me being on the road so much. So we switched to kind of focusing on our long retreats here in the Northwest and on our online courses. So we hadn't built an online course. So last year was all about the building of our online course. So that's been kind of what we've been doing, but it's been great. It's given me an opportunity to spend a lot more time on content development and, conceptualization of what we were doing.
This workshop model of traveling around doing 1 or 2 day workshops, a lot of teachers are stuck in. My friend Adam Barley, for example, I'm sure he does like 30 gigs a year, or used to. I know yoga teachers who have a similar sort of thing. They're in, and I personally will do a little tour once a year where I'll do 5 or 6 one-day events in 5 or 6 countries. I do that once a year, and it's absolutely exhausting. And I'm glad I'm not doing it all year, And I can really see the sense in focusing on some of the bigger things, just lifestyle-wise.
Yeah, it just financially made a lot more sense, and lifestyle-wise, I mean, I was gone for 3 months out of the year, but then if you add like the time it takes me to decompress afterwards and the time I'm kind of like really focused on prepping, my wife felt like I was sort of not very present for about half the year, which was pretty hard on her.
Yeah, so, you're either coming or going, and it's not that great on family life for sure, huh?
No, definitely not. And so this has been, quite challenging. It's a lot to completely change your business model. We've had to build a whole team. It was just me pretty much before this, and I had 1 employee, and now we've got a team of 5 people all working together on this, and it's coming together really well. So it's been a very exciting year. Lots of cool stuff going on. We got our own podcast up and running again, and lots of good stuff.
Let's just sort of, I want to return to the online training thing, because that's pretty interesting for me. And I see more and more trainers get into it now. It's becoming a thing, even in the embodiment world, which may surprise some. But let's just sort of say briefly, like, what is Evolve, Move, Play? Now, give me the elevator pitch, not the sort of epic, in-depth tome that I know you could also give us.
Yeah. Elevator pitch. I've never been that great at these. But the basic idea is that, most of what people do for exercise isn't enjoyable, and they're not very motivated for it. And it really doesn't have anything to do with what's motivating and what's natural for the human body. So the idea is, what did we evolve to do? What's inherently motivating? What gets us excited to do it? And what is kind of the foundation of movement that's going to help you be good at any movement task that you would want to take on. And that should be the foundation of your training. And so we look at play, we look at disciplines that have that kind of sustained, commitment to practice. And, that's basically what we put together in one method. So it's, moving your body and taking care of your body, moving with other people's bodies, moving with objects, and then moving through your environment, beautifully and gracefully.
Great. So it's exercise. It's more than that. It's movement. It's something you can take into other things.
Yeah.
I spent a couple of days with you in London in the park, and we were jumping around through trees and play fighting, what you call roughhousing, doing sort of movement practices, dance-like practices, and all about the sort of the fundamentals of being a human, as much for personal growth as for movement itself.
Yeah. So we say that, we're a method of self-cultivation focused on movement, but also incorporating mindfulness, nature connection, and community practices. Because essentially what makes a movement practice sustainable in the long run and really valuable to somebody is how it transforms them as a person. But any practice, whether it's a mindfulness practice or a community practice or crafting, it has a shadow side. It has a place where it can take you in the wrong way. And it also can be a place where you get stagnant. And so it's in the ecology of practice. It's in bringing them together and having really clear intent about what you're doing and understanding your why, that you get those impacts. And when you have that, then you can see where all these things can donate to that central purpose.
Great. So this idea of shadow sides, let's talk a little bit about that. This is something we both share an interest in this. I just did an argument today on the internet with some Feldenkrais people who were upset that I sort of claimed Feldenkrais didn't have everything. And sometimes I have this from yoga people or Aikido people, so it's not unique to Feldenkrais for sure. And I really like all those practices, but they're not, complete in any way. So what would create a sort of balanced ecology of practice in your view?
Well, I think, one of the fundamental ideas is that you have to kind of look at the nature of a human being in general. So we're looking at that at the movement level, right? When you practice just running, you tend to get injured, right? Because running is super important. It's a really valuable thing, but you're overloading your body in one way without giving it all of the nourishments. It's kind of like just eating one food, right? And getting too much of that and, maybe, too much of those micronutrients and not enough of other micronutrients. And so that's what we see. We see these pattern overloads with all the specialized athletes. And so we can say that, physically what a human being needs is a broad and diverse set of movement demands. And then the same thing is true really at the psychological and emotional level. It's like you're only ever talking to one person. It's not gonna give you everything you need. So you need a set of practices. And what we've noticed is that you can think of any practice as like a tool. And if it's used well, it can help you grow. But there's always it's like a sword with two edges, right? And there's always the potential that you're going to hurt yourself with it.
Yeah, over specialization in one field, or you see this with Ashtanga yogis who just do the same sequence every single morning. And yes, it can lead to a lot of growth, and they get some quite strong gains very quickly because they're very dedicated to something. But then ultimately it leads to like a fairly huge imbalance, both on the physical level and sometimes on a kind of psychosocial level too.
Yeah. So I was just talking to someone else about the idea of the shadow sides of parkour, and coming from that parkour background, it's like all of us who started in the beginning, it was like the world changed for us in some important way when we took up the practice. Mm-hmm. We became more confident, more courageous people. It helped us overcome certain aspects of our character that we were looking for. And so it's like parkour changes lives. It's the manna from heaven. And then eventually, like if you mature, I think there's always the tendency to fetishize whatever practice you're in, right?
Yeah.
It's the be all and the end all, whether it's Aikido or parkour or yoga. It's like that. This is the answer. And, I try to break out of that, and I can see, a lot of the stuff that's great about parkour is also true of surfing or snowboarding or skateboarding or, any of these other practices. So it's like, well, what is it that's really bringing me here? And then you start to ask yourself, is this change that I saw in myself, is that actually showing up in everyone who's practicing this?
Right. And is it showing up in my whole life as well, right? Like we've talked about this a lot on your podcast and other places, this idea of transfer. Like, how do you make sure that the thing you're getting very good at isn't just the thing itself and not life, right?
Yeah.
Which is ultimately, if it's an Aikido or a Do path in Japanese terms, rather than a Jitsu path, there's some way that it's transferring. And this has been one of my obsessions, and I think for you too now.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's something I don't remember. I ran across this article about Jitsu versus Do in martial arts, and the idea of your physical practice as being either oriented just towards the development of the technique, the jitsu, or oriented towards the cultivation of the self through a way, the do, which is the Tao, right? And that struck me as like essentially what I had been searching for within parkour was to go back to something that was do oriented. And that actually I felt like parkour had originated as a very do oriented practice, but had been lost. That aspect of it had been lost because most of the world acquired parkour by watching videos of practitioners on the internet, and you don't see the value, you don't see what it means to them, you only see what they perform.
And this is the same thing that happened to yoga. Once Instagram, the internet and things came in, it came from yoga do to yoga jitsu, and now there's people sort of pushing back in like the EYP system and other systems are out there into yoga do again, so sometimes there's a sort of cycle, or it's a kind of niches for different markets. And I think generally in the West the do way is always going to have a smaller market, but you combine a certain sort of spectacle of jumping through trees, and I've seen you backflip off bridges and impress small children and beautiful young women, and it's like you can do things like that which I can't, and I think that you've got a nice package for your do as well.
Yeah, so this is something that I feel like parkour as a central practice, that the relationship with the environment is interesting, because it seems like there's a central tension in martial arts between the jitsu and the do, which is if you listen to like you've done Brazilian jiu-jitsu as well, right? Or MMA.
Yeah, I've done a year of BJJ and MMA fairly intensely, which was a bit of a reality wake-up call, having done the sort of slightly fantasy-orientated do arts for a long time.
So what I've noticed is if you ask jiu-jitsu people why they train, they will give you answers that are very do-oriented. They will say, it makes me a stronger human being. It helps me understand and deal with my aggression. It gives me access to community. It's really fun. It's all these things. What they won't tell you is like, oh, these techniques are just super important in my life.
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
they're not going out and having to choke people out all the time.
No, usually you have to push quite hard for them to even share a single war story about how they once had to, use it in self-defense or something.
And so there's this implicit idea of character development that's in that, and the same thing in surfing, the same thing in all of these disciplines. People come back to them because they give them something. But in the kind of jitsu-oriented arts, like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the idea is kind of that if you focus on the technical, you gain the way, right? If you focus on the jitsu, you get the Tao. And I don't think that quite works. But then on the flip side, when you look at the do-oriented arts, often it seems like they degrade their connection to reality, right?
Yes, that's the key tension, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So the do arts lose track of the feedback loop of reality, that brutal confrontation, that it becomes fantasy orientated. And the jitsu arts maybe don't get quite as much transfer as they could, because there isn't there's some emphasis put on there. And also, like, if the do arts were really working, we'd expect them to be full of really nice people, and jiu-jitsu to be full of assholes by comparison. And that's just not my experience. I don't see a significant difference in people doing do arts in martial arts. Maybe in yoga I do, there is, but that's maybe more of a choice factor, like who chooses those arts,
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's differences in character that are attracted to it. And, I've been around MMA or jiu-jitsu schools where, it didn't seem to be developing character in the best way. And I've also been around jiu-jitsu and MMA schools where like I felt like those were the most grounded people, the most like realized people in many ways I've ever been. And I've seen the aikidokas who like seem like, they've really got a sense of self-mastery.
Yeah.
And then the ones who've gone so far into the bullshit that it's like, they're serving their ego in this extraordinarily
absolutely
bizarre way.
If I could jump in again, Rafe, it strikes me the schools of jitsu that I've seen have a lot of character development is due to leadership and culture. So for example, there's a really good jiu-jitsu club run by a guy called Yusuf in Brighton. He's just a really humble, like a good guy and well-raised, and he's, from a Muslim background, but he's not kind of hardcore about that, but he's just ethical, friendly person, good with kids. And he's created a kind of culture in his club, which people naturally fall into, which means that it becomes character developing for almost everyone who's there. It's against the culture of that club to be an asshole. Yeah. And I've also seen other clubs or MMA clubs that didn't have that. And I think the leadership and the culture there becomes the defining factor if the practice isn't explicitly that way oriented.
It's interesting you use the word culture, right? Because there's this whole idea right now of movement culture.
Yeah.
And that idea of movement culture started me thinking about culture as this thing that we're missing in a sense, right? That all of these competencies and these basic mores and ethics that were embedded into different traditions and different things that we experience and develop competencies in have been kind of lost. And they leave people with this very narrow sense of self to be oriented towards. What's interesting to me is that within a jitsu-oriented art, because you can just go win a tournament, right? You don't have to have that. You don't have to have a good culture. It's not necessarily explicit in the method, whereas in the Do, it's supposed to be explicit in the method. To be an orientation. And so I think that fundamentally there's more grounds for character development in BJJ than in Aikido, because you have to face the reality of dealing with a resistant opponent. But I want to see some place where those two things come together.
Yes, that's really the ideal, isn't it? And it's interesting how they tend to skew one way or another. Martial arts quite quickly in the West became sort of ego and combat orientated in a way that was sort of, I remember seeing some of the early UFCs, and as a traditional martial artist, just being like really like shocked by the, Chuck Liddell kind of, standing over Tito Ortiz in sort of completely arrogant victory or whatever, And that was a bit of a shock to me, and how quickly things can go how quickly an art can become bullshit as well when it loses that connection. I've seen people start their own Aikido schools and get a bit more disconnection because they're not having, at least other teachers hold them accountable. Then 5-10 years, it's a sort of no touch death throes,
Yep. Kia, right? Kia death by Kia.
There's a great guy, Rockass, on YouTube, who's this really humble Lithuanian friend of mine. And he made the journey from being an Aikido teacher and like a bona fide Aikido sensei to now he's becoming a sort of semi-pro MMA fighter. And there's a YouTube series of videos where it shows his, I think it's called Martial Arts Journey now. It was the top Aikido channel on YouTube. And it's a really fascinating journey. And he's just, what's interesting to me is just how much more healthy and manly he looks now than when he was an Aikido teacher. And he's still got the same humility. He's still got the same sort of caring, it really comes across with this guy. He's got this really lovely quality. He hasn't lost that, even though he's changed to this art. But I tell you what, he looks a hell of a lot in better shape.
I'm sure there's, there's more real challenge. There's more of that. And so it's, to kind of bring that conversation back a little bit, I think maybe we can find this in the martial arts, maybe someone like Rokas is an example of that journey. But I think for some reason there might be something really powerful about the relationship with the environment. When you push yourself to overcome the challenges in your environment, there's lots of ways to bullshit yourself with with compliant opponents, but you can't really bullshit yourself with the jumps, right? It's like
you can't convince a tree. A tree isn't going to kind of give in to a subtle social pressure to try and make you happy.
Exactly. So there's a way in which the relationship with the environment forces you to ground out with reality that isn't as necessarily true in any martial art that doesn't have really good free play. And so I think that in some ways, I think it's a nice place to start recultivating this kind of integration of the Do and the Jitsu in physical practice.
When people ask me who's Rafe and what's different about Rafe, because I talk about you a fair bit, it's a friend of mine, we often have interesting conversations I pass on to other people. I say, one, this guy is way more intellectual than most people in movement. Yeah. And two, the sort of nature thing. Like, there's Edo and there's Tom Westcler and there's Fighting Monkey, and they all offer something really cool. But you've become known as the guy who takes people out into the woods, or on that, you have that one retreat, don't you, where you're in the valleys and the redwoods and these incredible kind of natural environments. And that seems to be as much a part of the teaching as the techniques you're teaching people. Yeah,
absolutely. I think I said this earlier, but I restate it. We're a movement method, or a method of self-cultivation oriented towards movement, but then also having mindfulness, nature connection, and community practices. And it's developed over time that we understand that all these things are part of the ecology of practices. But I think people crave and need this reconnection to really understanding themselves, to play, to their body, the embodiment idea.
Mm-hmm. I've heard of that,
yeah. To nature, and to tribe, connection to other people. Like, these are the things that people are deeply alienated and disconnected from in our modern environment.
Right.
And we didn't evolve. Like, I love a lot of stuff that Edo does. I love Tom. Tom's my buddy. I just did one of his workshops. I love Fighting Monkey. But I also get the sense of irritation sometimes because I just see this beautiful movement happening in this environment that has nothing to do with what a human being needs to be, right? Like, just flat ground. Again, it's like, how many ways can you find to manipulate yourself in an environment that offers no information, no constraints, no cultivation, right? And often it's like there's not the same real challenge, right? It's not the same as like facing a waterfall, facing a jump, at height. Like, those things, to me, they're more alive. They're more profound in the way that they impact you and your character. And I have this sense, and maybe this is uncharitable, but I think for some of the people who choose this, it's like it's safe, right? They're still
controllable. There's a degree of control there, isn't there? That's a flat surface. I get to sort of choose. And it's interesting, with that very simple surface, people do very complex things. Whereas if you're just walking through the pebbles on Brighton Beach, you generally don't want to do any complex movement because it's already quite challenging to walk on those bloody pebbles, So it's you don't have to do a handstand or something, It's kind of already enough just to walk along them.
Yeah, I've noticed this tendency years ago with this idea of like parkour versus gymnastics. It was like gymnastics was taking a very simple set of environments and trying to create the most complex movements possible in them. We can think a lot of what movement culture is, and circus arts, et cetera, is all kind of playing in the same sphere. It's the complexification of movement within simple environments. And then parkour also contains that because there's free running and there's the acrobatics. But in some ways, it's like taking the most fundamental, simple aspects of movement and then trying to find the environments that are increasingly complex and can challenge you to become more and more competent to execute the stuff that's fundamental to a human being's ability to move.
Right. Like, I remember with you, I was working on something very simple, which was a 2-footed jump. So it's a very simple thing, 2 feet together, use your quadriceps, push off, jump a meter forward. But the complicated thing was I was doing it from one branch to another, and I was only a few feet off the ground, but it still would have, it might have hurt if I'd have missed it. And I was like, okay, so the actual move is very simple here. 2-footed, 1 meter forward jump. but the environment just made it interesting. Plus there was a social environment. I was, jockeying with all these kind of, young lads that were there, and there's a sort of psychological environment that comes with that. And there's a natural environment, like it's very beautiful and relaxing to be in the woods in London on a nice summer's day. And this is adding a whole different thing than if I just went to the gym and went, can I jump a meter forward? Yeah, I can.
Yeah. I had an interesting moment this summer. I was out training and I got kind of tired. And so I just laid down and I was just kind of having, shavasana, I guess, right? A little quiet moment. I was looking up in the trees, and there's these beautiful trees above me with kind of like gaps in their foliage where I could see the sky, and the wind was blowing through and blowing the leaves of the trees. It was really beautiful. And I had this realization that like at a certain point, it was inevitable that I had to go to doing my movement practices in nature, because I needed movement and I needed nature, and I didn't have space in my life for both.
Right. Okay. Because that is an essential food group, isn't it? Like,
yeah.
I can go to the gym and get some of my movement, and I do. I go to the gym; it's efficient, it's easy. But then I also have a big park near my house.
Yeah.
And for me, that adds something else, even if I'm just walking around the park. And then there's a complexity issue. So by playing in the park, by climbing a tree, by walking along a log, I do coaching calls while walking along a tree that's been fallen down and things like that, going up and down the slopes. I'm hitting all those little muscles, all those ligaments, all those little ways of moving that aren't going to get developed by doing weights in the gym. And so there's a couple of sort of needs that really meets there, isn't there?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we come from nature. We have, what E.O. Wilson called biophilia, right? We have this inherent desire to be present. These environments are meaningful to us. It's like everybody enjoys being in a beautiful nature scene, with running water and mix of trees and grass and, flowers, whatever it is. Those things are really impactful on us. And one of these ideas, I'm very inspired by Jordan Peterson, but he had this analogy of compression, right? Like imagine a thumbnail versus like a 4K picture, and how much more impactful the 4K picture is. So like one way of thinking about meaning is that it's like literally being able to see more of the thing, more pixels. So it's like how high resolution is your experience of reality, and on how many dimensions. And this is where I see a movement practice having this incredible ability to actually create connection with nature. Because imagine the difference between looking at a picture of a tree and being actually present with the tree. But then imagine what it's like, what the meaning of that tree is, and how much meaning that tree has for you when you move through the tree. And when you know what it feels like on your hands, you know what the gaps between the branches are, you know the movements that it affords you. All of that adds meaning, right? Like the tree becomes sacred to you.
Quick break to tell you about our program. So as well as the podcast, we have various kinds of online training. So we have the Embodied Yoga Principles online training, as well as in-person training. Embodied Yoga Principles for yogis who want to get yoga off the mat, specialize in the psychology of yoga, unique postures. It's a 5-day training. We have one in Brighton, one in Berlin, and one in Austin, Texas. So if you go to Embodied Yoga Principles, you can find them. Also the online version of the training for people who can't make those dates. Excellent courses. The Embodied Yoga Principles training for the yogis. For the coaches and facilitators, we have the Embodied Facilitator course. This is our flagship course. We offer it in Moscow, also in the UK. A 9-month adventure, real deep dive into embodiment. It's the biggest embodiment program I do. It could be like movement people who want to work in business more. We have people like dancers and martial arts teachers come to learn more about working in mainstream settings, but also for coaches and trainers who want something really well structured, who want to work on themselves, want to learn practical tools, learn how to work with the body in facilitation. If you can't make EFC, and it is a big ask, there's an online course we run called the Foundations of Embodiment Certification. So if you go to Embodied Facilitator, you'll find the in-person, and then FEC, F-E-C, F for Freddie, E-C for Charlie, FEC. you'll come up with the foundations of embodiment certification, and also do one-day events all around the world. So I'm just about to do a tour to Slovenia, Berlin, Copenhagen, Brussels, Amsterdam, and Brighton. The Brighton one is £10, which is like $15. So if you're coming from abroad, that could make that affordable. The Brighton one's always like a really big fun one, so that's coming up. Again, go to the Embodied Facilitator course to see all of these events. And we have a little online evening as well. If people just want a taster, again, that's £10. That's a 3-hour thing coming up as well. embodiedfacilitator.com, and you'll find all those events or embodied yoga principles for the yoga ones. Okay, so that's the stuff that I sell. Oh, and the book, the Embodiment book. If you want to get my book and learn about embodiment through reading, you can also get the Embodiment book available at Amazon and no good bookstores. So yeah, there we go. Excuse the interruption, and back to the episode. Yeah, and for sort of environmental protection and this kind of thing is quite if people have a relationship with the environment as a subject relationship, almost, it's really going to impact how much they'd be willing to let that tree be chopped down. As something nice to look at is one thing, but something you've had a relationship with and you've climbed 100 times is completely different.
Yeah, and then we even go, this is, like I said, we're a movement oriented method, but within the nature connection, you go to the next level, which is like that tree also is maybe a source of food, right? You can go out and harvest chestnuts or walnuts or whatever, or apples from the trees that you move in. And that adds this other relationship that you're having with the tree. Or you can know the animals that live in that tree, or the way that it interacts with the environment, or the type of wood that it provides, or fibers from the bark. All of those things create a language. It's like there's a world out there that is like the original book, the most important form of literacy for a human being for an entire evolution. And most of us are now illiterate to it. We don't speak the language that the world is expressing towards us, and that we had to know for almost our entire evolution. And now we've become deaf, dumb, and blind to it.
Yeah. Yeah, what is the sort of Garden of Eden thing of name all the animals, It's the first job is to learn the name of all the animals and the trees while you're at it. But yeah, I used to teach kids from the city when I used to connect them to the countryside, and they wouldn't know what a horse chestnut tree looked like. They'd never played a game of conkers. Do you play that in America where you hit the conkers together? It's a very British thing, maybe. Or they didn't know what an evergreen was and why, some sort of leaves fell off on some trees and not others. And these were really simple things. I'd worked on tree farms growing up when I was young. So this was sort of stuff I took for granted, and these city kids had no idea about this stuff. I was like, wow, I was pretty shocked when I realized the level of disconnection.
Yeah, it's literally disconnection. And we live with this alienation, this disconnection in so many ways. And I think that's the reason why we have these epidemics of depression and anxiety and suicide, because we're separated from the things that nurture us and give meaning to our lives. So, how does this fit with online training then? So I want to come back to this. I've just launched a big online course myself. Yeah. It's called Foundations of Embodied Certification. And the reason we did it was because a lot of people couldn't make EFC, which is our big face-to-face course, which includes, retreats in the countryside. So we have, kind of a light level. We have the kind of nature connection, and definitely have the community and the personal connection there. And we made a little bit of it online because we found that you could still do pretty deep work online, which surprised me. But after the Embodiment conference and how deep that went for people, I was like, wow, you really can do deep work online. Yeah. But we still kept, these face-to-face things. And we just found a lot of people couldn't afford it. And so we put this course out, which is, as I said, called FEC, Foundation of Embodiment Certification, which is at least giving people the basics. It's much cheaper. It's, I found there was a lot of people who say were carers or were physically disabled and they found it difficult to get out, or just had kids even, and they weren't able to come to week-long retreats, or even sometimes 2 or 3 day retreats they couldn't get to. And I didn't realize this till I started putting work online, that I was excluding a huge number of people for financial and practical reasons, basically. And so I've been struck by how deep work you can do online, but then also isn't there a bit of a challenge, based on what you just said in terms of online learning? Oh, absolutely. So, for many years, the question has been how to scale, right? People love the ideas. They love the experience that we give them. It's like, how do you scale a business like this? And always people would suggest to me, you need to build an online course. But even though I understood that, like, intellectually, that was the right business move, it didn't feel right, because it was like, how can I capture this thing that's happening in nature, in person, and give it to someone online? I couldn't conceptualize it. It seemed, it just didn't seem right. And what changed was basically, like, I would have people come and tell me it was the most profound experience that they'd had in movement. And I'd see them like a year later, and I'd ask them, they'd come to another workshop. I'm like, oh, what have you been doing? And they'd be like, mostly we've been doing stuff in the gym. And it was like, as profound as the experience was, it wasn't sufficient to break people out of their habit.
Time, right? Like I've seen better results sometimes in online, because people habit breaking takes time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can do that in an 8-week course. You can't do that in a week-long workshop. And same with meditators. You go on retreat, it's great. You go back home, you lose the habit. But if you were, doing an online meditation course for 8 weeks, and every day you were clocking in for 30 minutes instead of trying to do it 8 hours a day for 2 weeks, after that 30 minutes of 8 weeks, after 8 weeks, you'll have a solid meditation practice. That'll be a habit at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. We have meditation in our course too. But the idea is precisely around habit formation. It was like, I developed, for us, the seminars, the retreats, that's like the center. It's the heart of the method, right? But it was like a heart without enough body in some sense, because it has to be something to carry it forward. And the online courses turned out to be the best tool that we have available. We have this power now to provide a structure for people that they can hold on to between the seminars, that they can come to a seminar and then get an online course and go, keep going doing it. Or they can
work together, right? They can work together. Like I do a 1-day course in Berlin in February, and people feel really inspired, and they say, what do I do now? And I say, well, you could come to EFC. And they're like, there's no way, I've got 5 kids. I say, well, here's an online course, and here's a discount code as you came to my workshop, and enjoy. It gives me something I can leave. I got very dissatisfied with the sort of parachuting into places. And as you say, maybe I'd see someone 2 years later and then say, oh yeah, we did something about centering or 4 elements. And I go, really? I gave my heart and soul all day, and that's all you remember? And sometimes one thing is still pretty good, right? I mean, centering can change your life, but it's still like, whereas I think if that person had a follow-up, they would, here's another access one, Rafe. This will amaze you. We have an online course for embodied yoga principles now that we launched, and we weren't sure if anyone would buy it. It wasn't that cheap, but it was very nicely done with good video, as I know your stuff is. And I got a message from someone in Iran about a week ago, and this person said, listen, we can't buy anything because the economic embargo on us on credit cards, it's impossible. I definitely can't come to visit you. But I'm, really interested in your work. And I just said, cool, have a free copy of this course. And it's like absolutely amazing. And this is a person that literally had no chance of coming to a workshop in England.
Yeah. I mean, it massively scales your ability to reach people with whatever it is that you're doing. So I actually, at your workshop, EYP workshop, you talked about Jedi marketing and Sith marketing.
Yeah,
that was quite impactful on me, because I grew up as a hippie kid, and
like Star Wars.
There's there's a certain shame around money, right?
Yeah,
wanting
so many people
trying to get money, and a real skepticism around any kind of marketing or capitalism that comes out of that background, and just seeing that, like, if you have something that you think can really change people's lives in a really positive way, if you're not creating access to it, it's irresponsible.
Yeah, I challenge the group, don't I, when I teach that piece of marketing, and say, listen, it's actually evil not to market something is good. If you have something which will genuinely help people, it's actually unethical to not give people access to that, to not at least provide an opportunity for people to, if they want to go for it, go for it. And, my logic is pretty solid around that as I lay it out. I've laid that out maybe to 20 different groups, and first people laugh, and then they go, oh shit, now I see. And I really challenge people. I say, there's something a little selfish and irresponsible about not learning some basic marketing if you really believe what you do helps. But in the vast majority of people in this field listening to this who are, practitioners, they love what they do and they've genuinely seen it help people, whether they're a yoga teacher, a meditation teacher, a contact improv teacher. The reason they do it is not for the money. Almost any part of the embodiment field isn't as lucrative as a semi-normal job. And really there's better ways to make money. So it must be from the love. It must be for also because the fact they get satisfaction seeing it help people. So the scale, I'm not ashamed to talk about marketing with you on this podcast, because it's like the scalability is it provides access to people who couldn't otherwise afford it, but it also creates a decent living. In any other field, after 20 years of research, if I was a doctor, I'd be like a highly paid consultant or whatever, and it's like just scraping a living. Whereas with scalable stuff, if people are good and the market likes it, there's no reason. Like we sold 100 copies of the Embodied Yoga Principles training and made more money than I had off the last 3 Embodied Yoga Principles trainings face to face. And there's no reason after the next conference we shouldn't sell 1,000 copies of it. Yeah. And it's not about greed. That's about saying, this has value and it's providing access, and we give copies away if people can't afford it. And I could actually make a really decent living from that.
Yeah. And I mean, I believe if we want the best people to be taking on the most important problems, we need to be able to make money doing it.
Right.
Right. And I think that movement, these problems that we're talking about, I think they're some of the most profound issues that we face, right? Like, people are suffering. They're suffering from disconnection and alienation, and they're suffering from having bodies that they have no relationship with, and environments that they have no relationship with, and communities that they have no relationship with. And
the big three again. Yep.
Yeah, they need.
Yep. Go on.
They need leaders and people who can step up and make that happen. And if they can't put food in their mouths, then those leaders are going to go work for pharmaceutical companies. I've seen some really intelligent people who are amazing at this take that route.
I mean, just here's a fact. There are no professional Aikido teachers in the UK. And actually, I tell a lie, there might be one. I think there's one. Now, if you think how many excellent Aikido teachers there must be in this country, it's a pretty widespread art, Off the top of my head, I could name 20 really good Aikido teachers. And they're all hobbyists. And they maybe teach twice a week. So you have a world, and just the economics of Aikido. In the USA, it's a little bit easier to have a dojo because of the costs of rents and studio space and things. Still not great. In France, they get government funding. But that means that there's, world-class Aikido teachers in the UK who just cannot afford to teach more than twice a week. If they teach 3 times a week, when are they going to spend time with their wife? 4 times a week, forget it, right? So it's like they're all teaching 2, maximum 3 times a week. And I think, wow, that's a travesty, because these guys are pretty average accountants and butchers and postmen and, pretty average in whatever they do. And they might find that fine, but it's obvious their true calling is Aikido, but they can't scale that. And they just, the economics means they can't make that their life.
Yeah. So, the online format's interesting because it potentially provides a place that it's cool, because as you mentioned, it creates access for lots of people who wouldn't otherwise have it. And then it creates a potential for people to make a living doing these things and to devote themselves fully to it. When I think about those Aikido teachers who are doing it twice a week and have to work a full-time job, it's like, how much of their potential as Aikido teachers are they also sacrificing by not getting the reps in, by not having to study, by not having, their full attention on what they have best to offer the world?
There's a travesty in them not being able to fully follow their purpose. And also, as you say, there is something to be said for doing the reps, right? Like, like I got pretty good at teaching because I was teaching just every day for 8 hours a day. And I was teaching various physical practices. And after 3 years of teaching 8 hours a day, I was pretty good at teaching. There is something in in doing the repetitions. And you'll see this, the quality of Aikido in France is generally better than the UK now, because there are so much more full-time teachers there who are government sponsored. So there's different models for how to do this, but I think the scaling one is definitely one. What about sort of safety concerns? Like there's a lot of people that have learned acro yoga from the internet now, for example. When I was growing up in Aikido, you couldn't really learn Aikido from the internet. YouTube wasn't a thing yet. I remember getting one VHS of this demonstration from France and pausing it and trying to study the moves, and there's all sorts of techniques we hadn't seen before, but it was really difficult on a grainy VHS, And now, you can learn anything online, and a lot of it's free as well. So it's like, how do you compete with free? Is there safety issues? And lastly, is there community issues? So, one of the great things of going to a gym is I start to recognize people now,
Yeah.
And, I had someone spot me today who's I've seen a few times before. It's quite a small Romanian girl. It was quite comical, actually. And, but, making friends and having that support and having a personal trainer and, those sort of things, does that get missing in an online context?
To a degree, yeah. And also that's something we really tried to fix, right? So in order to be happy trying to sell an online product and feel good about it, I had to try to ask, how am I really solving the problem, right, for these people, right? So it's like, what are the barriers holding people back from engaging in this practice? Now I have taught hundreds of people, love the experience of doing Evolve, Move Play with me, but most of them were not able to continue doing it when I wasn't present.
Right.
So then the question is, what's the tool that helps us fix that? Well, it looks like an online course. Then the question is, what do we need to do to fix that? The biggest problem is the social aspect of it. People like to do things that put them in touch with other people. Right? A lot of times we choose the practices that we choose not because they're optimal for us, because we have access to our friends there. So it's
it's just not like, I think of my Sistema club that I go to in Brighton. It's just a nice bunch of guys, and it's all guys, and it's just down the road, so convenience is also a factor, but it's just kind of a nice vibe, and I know the instructor and I know a couple of the other people there, and they respect me, and it's just a sort of pleasant social environment that at the end of a 10-hour day of work, I don't want to be around a bunch of knobheads,
Yeah. So that aspect is something that's obviously it's the hardest to recapture online. So we have a group on Facebook right now. Eventually we'll have it housed on our website where we are, having people exchange and share their videos. And we highly, highly encourage people to bring their videos on, and we make sure to comment on them, one of the coaching staff, every time someone does that. So they get that sense of social support. And they communicate with each other. And we also have calls where everyone calls in and we talk to each other and kind of talk about the experience of what they're learning. So they're getting that social support, they're getting a sense of community, they're getting a sense that they're part of a tribe that's moving forward. It's not perfect, right? But if you want to take on these practices that are on the kind of cutting edge of what is out there, it requires sacrifices. When I started training parkour, I was traveling hours to go and train with people because there's the only people who are available to train with. So that's one aspect of it. We've done a ton on time management. That's a huge aspect that's holding people back. So we have a whole time management section in the course. We have mindfulness practices. We have, habit formation and safety. That's a whole interesting conversation, but we build things through what we call what's based on a constraint-led approach. So it's not about forcing people into doing specific things. It's about giving them a set of ways to look at the environment and constraints that then they can start expressing what they're capable of right now, and then helping them understand the technique and refine the technique over time. And so we ran into these ideas a while ago and kind of implicitly started developing them through our workshops. But we found that the safety increases tremendously when you're doing this because the athletes are choosing what they do. So we use that. And another thing is obviously we have educational materials, not just on how to move in the trees, but on what makes a tree safe, how to pay attention to the branches. What does a rotting branch look like? What types of trees have stronger limbs and are more trustworthy? Understanding the lever action and how much more force you're putting on the tree limb when your hands are further away, stuff like that. So the safety record's great, and And it is a very important thing to think about.
Yeah, nice one. Well, we found with community a couple of things help. One is we have peer groups, so we get people to be on a phone call with each other once a week. We do that, so that's an option. And another one is Zoom calls. So we have a Zoom call once a month for the people that do the online course, so they at least get a kind of chance to check in. And then this great feature of Zoom that we found during the conference is the breakout room, where you it sounds like a small thing, but it's a really important feature that you can have 50 people on a call, but you can give them time in groups of 3 or 4. And if say the call's 3 hours, you can maintain the same groups that they keep going, like little pods that they go back to.
Yeah.
So those 2 features we've found are really, really helpful for the community aspect. And Facebook has a terrible reputation, but there are, the conference group, for example, has some pretty decent discussions on it quite often. And the EFC group definitely does. We don't have sort of trolling or unpleasantness there.
Yeah.
So again, if you create the culture, there are places. Slack is another one we use. We have Slack groups, and we've been playing with that as a way for people to share messages, or WhatsApp groups. We had a WhatsApp group, didn't we, around the training you came to? And people were sharing, funny pictures and little messages and practical stuff about travel. But, there's definitely ways to be skillful around building some connection with people, even in that online context. With the Embodiment conference, one of the jobs we've given our web designers is there has to be a social aspect. So at the conference, if you meet people online, you can connect with them through the portal. We said this is one of the key takeaways of the conference is there's a way to record information, but there's also a way to connect with other people through that portal, which is quite a challenge. So it's just in the design stages now, but we wanted that the community aspects are so important that we wanted that to be like built into the design.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, the community aspect is such an interesting thing, and it's something that, I think I'm a bit more of a lone wolf type than a lot of people. I can go train on my own for a long time and be okay with it. But the workshops that I do, because of the nature of staying together over a longer period of time, that kind of revealed this aspect of how important community is.
It's interesting when people like me and you are pushing community. Because I'd say we're both not particularly, we're not like relationally orientated people,
Yep.
But as you say, it does come out when you're doing like I've seen it come out in 2 days when I was with your guys in Hampstead Heath, with not even residential. So, with your, was it Return to the Source program? I imagine it's definitely coming out there. We see this on our EFC residentials as well, that it really bonds people, a week doing this kind of embodied work together. So with risk and with emotion and with sharing, it's like after a week of that environment, people are bonded in a way which you might be more than friends you've known for a year in your office,
Yeah, it's profound. It's really interesting. It was totally a discovery because I remember, I'd ask people, what was the biggest takeaway from the event? And right away from the very beginning, it was like, oh, the other people, the relationship with the other people, friends.
Not my teaching. Fuck you. It's
there's
always
a little bit
people.
of that, yeah, right?
Good. But you can't sell a course on this. It's what when we do courses, it always has to be like the big deal trainer, or what you're gonna get, and it's always the thing that people take away is the community. It's like it frustrates me that you can't sell a course so easily based on this thing that people consistently report is the best thing about it.
Yeah, but people are really suffering in this. I just saw something recently that said that the average American has one person they can count as a close friend.
Wow.
20 years ago, that was 3. So, 3 is still not very many, but we've lost 2 out of 3 in 20 years.
Yeah.
People are deeply, deeply lonely. And they have, I think of it as like this paradoxical problem that we're over-socialized and maybe over-socialized and under-intimacy. Right?
The weird thing for me is because interests are so much more specialist now. If you're in a village, you were basically the blacksmith or the farmer, and there wasn't that many options. Whereas for now, we're so specialized. The people I most connect with are all over the world. So I talked to Alexandra in Russia today. I'm talking to you now. I'm talking to someone else in the west of England after this. And it's like the people I really connect with aren't local to me anymore, other than my wife and a couple of friends who live locally. I've got a little Systema group. I've got a yoga teacher friend who I get on well with, whose class I go to. But there's this sort of virtual distributed friends now. And I've definitely made a real effort to make and keep those good friends in my 30s and as I go to my 40s, that I think it would be so easy to lose all those.
Yeah, it's a strange and interesting thing, because there's a kind of tragedy to it.
Yeah.
There's this beauty to it, which is that you have this access now to finding people of like mind.
Yeah.
And like to be able to work together, in like going very deeply on stuff that it would be hard to in a community that had fewer people that you could access who had similar minds. And so like I'm the same way. Like later today, I'll talk to someone from Boston, and I've got Simon in Australia, and all these people who are really meaningful, important kind of pieces in my life who I really love to connect to, but we're not able to do it in person very often. And there's something that's missed. And then there's this, like when I got on the call with you, you were answering a bunch of negative emails or something. And it's like, there's this also the sea of tension that we're attracted to.
Guys, if you're out there and you're thinking about trolling me around the conference or anything else, please don't. Like, I could get 100 messages in a day that tell me what a piece of shit I am. And it's like, what I've realized, Rafe, the more exposure we get in these kind of things, because we can scale, right? One of the negative sides of that is just the amount of crap we can get given. Like, it takes an almost inhuman, enlightened, thick-skinned, non-attached to view of self. I don't know, but I think I need to like level up my sort of spiritual development just to deal with my inbox.
Yeah.
Anyway, listen, we'll talk about that another time, mate. We need to wrap up, unfortunately, as I've got another call coming in 5. So this whole call, we've been talking about online learning. I hope it hasn't come across to listeners as sort of too much of a crass advert. I mean, genuinely, I want to talk about this subject, and it is something that it's my lead edge, and I see pros and cons to it. It's not all good, but there's a lot of good in there, including the scalability. So, in terms of my courses, I mentioned Embodiment Facilitator course, the big one in line, and then the online version, which is Foundations of Embodiment Certification, if people Google that, and Embodied Yoga Principles online training, if they just look up Embodied Yoga Principles. Rafe, your big training in person that I would love to come to, but I don't even have access to, is Return to the Source, right?
Yeah. That's we have 3 spots as we're recording this.
By the time it comes out.
Yeah, by the time it's out, I'm 100% sure that's going to be sold out. We do have a seasonal retreat in spring and fall that there may still be access to. And I'm working on coming to Europe. So for the European listeners, we're going to try to do something like that. But right around the time this is going to come out, we are going to be launching our next round of the Introduction to Natural Parkour online. And this is that body that can hold a practice together and have all that habit formation. So I think it's going to be we're really excited.
Where do people find it? Introduction to Natural Parkour. Where do they go together?
EvolveMovePlay.com. We'll share a link directly to it for you. That you can put in the
we'll put it in the show notes. That's easy to do.
And everything. Yeah.
But if people just go to EvolveMovePlay.com, they'll also find it as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, what is that under on there, or just be on the website? It'll be obvious as soon as they go in.
Yeah, we'll have the website set up so it'll like pop up and be like, "Hey, here it is."
Join articles on there. How to find great trees. That's your equivalent of like how to pick up girls. Is that okay to cry while I jump? That's a compelling title. I like that. The neuroscience of overeating. Oh, I better listen to that one. And Katie Bowman, who's very cool, movement ecology. A lot of the ideas that we talked about earlier are influenced by her as well, right? So there's some things on your website as well. Videos of how sexy Rafe is, jumping off cool shit, and the course that we mentioned.
Yeah. Cool. So that'll be up right now. The top bar doesn't have the online courses on it, but that will be in place when people when this airs.
Rafe, thank you so much for joining us today.
Mark, always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
some ways to get more, to give back, and to get more involved now. So the biggest request I have would be to share the podcast with your friends, people that you think would really enjoy it. Email it to them, put it on your social media, tell them about it, old school. Really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support us financially, you can go to Patreon. That's patreon.com/embodiment podcast and give us $1 an episode. And I'd say they're well worth $1. So that's less than £1 if you're in UK-ish. So yeah, please go there. On the embodifacilitator.com website is where this is hosted. If most people I think listen to for iTunes. iTunes, we'd certainly appreciate a review. The way iTunes works means that a review means more people will find it. iTunes regards it as more important for searches. So even a couple of sentences review really does help as a little thank you to us. And if you want to go to embodifacilitator.com, you can see the actual, links to the sites. There's comments on there. The Facebook group tends to be where people discuss things. So if you go to put in the Embodiment podcast into Facebook, there's a page which is relatively quiet and a group which does have some discussion on. So I will reply to things personally there. So also on the embodifacilitator.com website, there's all sorts of freebies there. There's videos, there's free ebooks, there's ebooks you can buy. And of course, there's our newsletter list. If you want to stay in touch and learn about things like the Embodied Facilitator course and our next Embodied Yoga Principles teacher training, then go to that website and you'll see a little pop-up and you can get the newsletter through there. Okay, so I think they're the main ones. Tell your friends, pay us some money on Patreon, give us a review on iTunes, send us your email if you want to be on the newsletter list, and get involved on the Facebook there. Bit long. Pick whatever you like that works for you. Until next time, welcome home to the body.